You're muted. Okay, we're ready to go whenever you guys are.
So I think where we were, was we were talking about what would be appropriate given that common law is not here. I think, but municipal attorney felt comfortable that, yeah, we're not going to answer the legal questions, but naming the legal questions and just making sure that that's also your understanding, John, and if anyone else from DOT or online wants to speak to that too, just make sure we're answering the right legal questions. Sure. But I think the right next step, I'm curious, all that they agree, would be to take the draft memo that Aaron has prepared and have Aaron work with Joe and the municipal attorney's office to sort of refine that language and more clearly state what could be AMAT's position. And then for that letter to come to the policy committee to then discuss, vote on whether to send to, as a reply to the commission. Could be sort of a time, as you said, time management step. So that would probably happen at our October meeting.
Depending on how long
September
it,
meeting.
yeah, depending on how long it takes, yeah. We could try for the October meeting.
We could try for October.
Yeah.
Okay. That's not good to you. Anyone here? And then I think the other question was that there's this July 14th letter from US Department of Transportation to Commissioner Anderson that states that MPO or MPA boundary updates require changes to operating agreement. And requiring the operating agreement to be updated could not necessarily delay the boundary update. And I was wondering if DOT's position has changed at all since receiving that letter from FHWA.
I mean, we're required, our agreement itself requires us to sort of loose review as the annual. Yeah, I think there's citations in that February letter. That if there's any significant changes that the federal code requires us to open up the agreement. And I think the assertion is that as AMATS is going to start asserting that they have jurisdiction over the NHS system, that's but regardless, I'm going to answer that question. Seems like it should be clarified, whether it was.
I'm not seeing, I don't see in the letter, maybe you can help me spot it, the requirement of the operating agreement, yeah, or Aaron.
Yes, we do actually have in our operating agreement as part of, let me get to it real quick. Okay, so in our section on page 8, under section 5.2.1, number 10 or letter, number 10, it says the policy committee, it's outlining what are the policy committee responsibilities. Keep going down. There you go. Number 10 right there, annually review this agreement, the air quality plan and progress made towards the achievement of national ambient air quality standards throughout the area.
So is, Sean, is your suggestion that we have not met that requirement of annually reviewing the agreement?
I think so, because it's under the powers and duties of the AMATS.
Forgive me, I'm not aware of what's happened in the past, but is that something that has traditionally been sort of reapproved on an annual basis?
There's no reapproval requirement
Okay,
for the operating agreement. The only change is updating the operating agreement signatures is if you do a significant change, so such as a makeup of the policy committee, a proportional makeup of the policy committee, or add in new duties or authorities of the policy committee. Outside that, it remains in effect until it's updated, or, done an actual reauthorization, basically. The policy committee is empowered to make amendments to the operating agreement whenever they wish, outside of those few requirements outlined in federal regs. Typically, for reviewing of the operating agreement, based on my understanding, that's been done by staff bringing anything to the policy committee to change for the operating agreement. So my position would bring forward a recommendation that we need to update the information in the operating agreement because federal regulations have changed or other things like that. Or we get a comment from FHWA, like we did a couple of years ago when we had to update the information regarding our tip thresholds for amendment versus admin block.
So I guess that would be fair. That one legal question to investigate is, does the operating agreement need to be updated before the boundary change approved? Okay,
What has been the past practice on that, Aaron? Have boundary changes been considered significant changes to require changes or updates to the operating agreement?
You know, the only thing that would be changed is updating the appendix that shows what the operating or what the boundary is. That would be the only change that's accompanying the boundary itself. My understanding is we have not done a past update of the boundary as part of, or of the operating agreement as part of a boundary change, except unless there was happened at the subsequent time changes to federal regulations that we wanted to catch. But I can't find any evidence that they were done together at the same time as a requirement.
How frequently are the boundaries been updated?
Every census, they're updated in some way, shape, or form because of changes to the urbanized area or corrections that need to be made to it.
And so it sounds like have a letter from the Federal Highway Authority asserting that kind of what you're saying is that we don't need a change to the operating agreement for the boundary change to go into effect. So I don't know if the disagreement is really, I think it's maybe AKDOT versus Federal Highway Authority. I don't know what AMATS role is in determining that question.
The code 23 CFR 450.310J requires a revision to the operating agreement if there's a substantial change in decision-making authority or responsibility.
Are you saying that the boundary change?
Yeah, I'm saying that the AMATS, saying that they have control over the regionally significant projects is going to change in decision.
But that's not the boundary.
Right, how does that pertain to the boundary agreement?
It's
So then why is the boundary agreement a holdup? If if the boundary agreement itself doesn't represent a significant change in AMATS authority.
the second question is whether the expansion is appropriate.
yeah, so I think those are essentially,
Okay,
there are potentially three legal questions there. So you can try to put my lawyer brain on.
yes, I think
Question number one is the assertion correct that the boundary, the governor cannot approve that until the operating agreement? That's number one, and I think that's, we have some, I think you have a preview of what we're likely to argue in the DOT. But I think it is worthy that's something as well. I don't know if we can debate the letter and revise it when it comes back to the policy committee. So that's question one. Question two is, are the letter's assertions about the regulatory requirements for the boundary change correct? And then I think question number three is, for example, AMATS removal of the safer sewer from the MTP. That what we did?
MTP and tip.
And both, is that a change in AMATS authority that it's substantial enough to trigger? Or is that ongoing historical practice that's not actually changed in the authority? I think those would be the three disagreements within that one question.
Yeah. But I think the overall question that we're trying to answer is who has the jurisdiction or the authority over the projects on sort of regionally significant.
Right, which I think maybe if I was gonna add a fourth question would be on regionally significant roads or national highway system roads, does DOT have the authority to change the scope of projects without the policy committees or timing or any number of things? That would be a fourth question, I think. And then what maybe, which is related maybe to a fifth question, actually, which is for projects on regionally significant roads, is the policy committee required to include them as proposed by COT in the tip of the MTP? Or does the policy committee have the ability to change or reject those
Make a
DOT proposals?
or to make amendments.
Or to make them?
Sure.
So there's actually 5 questions there. I'm counting my P's, I tell everybody.
No, I haven't.
So if the, so with the findings is that AMATS has the ability to do that, another question that we need to answer is, if there's a project that was in the MTP, a project that was in the tip,
Yeah.
that project gets initiated. And sewer highway project we had, we're ready to deliver that project, we think that will. Where does financial responsibility lie, whether it's if the FHWA requires reimbursement or not, there's still 10% of that state match. So plus back to AMATS making decisions on both state and federal money. So who's responsible for reimbursement? Does that make sense?
So if I'm understanding, if there's a project. That maybe we take, the safer sewer obviously is a more intense example, what if we think about? Well, maybe it's that we should talk about, you spent some money in environmental review design. Those sorts of things, because it was moved from the tip and the MTP. Those costs, so to pay them back.
Not necessarily, I would say, that there's potential for that, maybe for not that project, because we didn't get to the departmental document. For a project like, O'Malley to Diamond, where we have an environmental document, we spent money in final design, and we pull that.
Yeah.
The FHWA could say that they want some or all of that reimbursed. Even if they don't, we still have 10% of that cost is state money.
Okay. So then the question would be, yeah, I guess the question would be, if you're spending money on design of a project, do you get reimbursed if the project doesn't get delivered because of that AMATS policy then? Presents, regardless of whether the fact that's the reimbursement. Yeah, that would be pretty surprising to me, but I think it doesn't make much of an answer.
And I think that there's a related question, which is perhaps.
Sorry, before you continue, Emily Haynes is here with FHWA. She has her hand raised. Would a policy committee member like to hear from Emily?
Yes.
This is Emily Haynes with the Federal Highway Administration in the Alaska Division. All I was offering was that if there's anything that would help, any questions that I could help field right now that are kind of specific to this conversation, I'm happy to answer those, or at least provide follow-up if I don't know the answer. But if you have any questions related to the federal planning finding, anything that was included in there, and sort of what the federal requirements related to planning authorities.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful, Emily. Thank you. I think we do have a question about the relationship between MPO operating agreements and boundary updates. Is there anything in FHWA regulations that requires those two things to be done in tandem?
No, we don't have any. If a federal requirement, they're not related actions at all. The planning boundary is specifically just the area that the MPO is responsible for all transportation planning. And then the operating agreement is just how the MPO kind of carries all those things out. So, or carries out all of their responsibilities. They're not interrelated at all. Unless, of course, I guess if your operating agreement specified that you would update the operating agreement with every boundary update, but I don't know if that's the case here.
It's not the case here. So just to kind of summarize back, a update to the boundary does not necessarily constitute a significant change that would also then require in turn an update to the operating agreement. Is that correct?
Again, that's going to be kind of what's within the operating agreement. But if I was hearing before, the planning boundary is just kind of a map that's appended to the operating agreement. So I mean, that might be your own legal question as to whether or not that constitutes a significant change, but I'm not aware of us requiring any operating agreements to be updated whenever boundaries are updated.
And then
I feel like that was, yeah.
I think one of the sort of big contentions here is who has authority over planning within the adopted boundary when it comes to national highway system facilities. Can the state DOT take unilateral action to determine the scope, timing, funding, of NHS, or does the MPO policy committee get to weigh in on those projects? Can we amend the scope? Can we move timing backward or forward?
Yes, the MPO has full authority for planning all projects within the MPA boundaries, including those on the NHS. So how this works, how project selection works, the MPO plans for all projects on and off the NHS within the planning boundaries. The projects are then selected by the state DOT to move forward on the NHS. So essentially DOT gets to select from your MTP and your TIPs which projects they move forward with.
Of course, DOT's legal opinion is different than that, in that any of the projects that are considered a regionally significant project can be dictated by the STIP and by the state to be inserted into the MTP and the TIP.
Emily, was there an FHWA definition of a regionally significant project?
No, it has to impact the transportation system. Because regionally significant projects can occur across the state. They don't have to be within an MPA boundary. Within an MPA boundary, we would defer to the AMAT or the MPO's definition of regionally significant. So I think this was something that we talked about at the Planning Peer Exchange in January, that maybe it would be helpful for each MPO to define what regionally significant means.
Mm-hmm.
So for each project, then, who determines whether or not it's regionally significant? If it's within the MPA boundary, is it the policy committee then that would determine if it's regionally significant, or is it just the state Department of Transportation who would determine that?
It would be the MPO, and maybe it would help me understand, because being a regionally significant project doesn't necessarily, I guess, is the understanding that if it's regionally significant, then the state is responsible?
That is the state's interpretation.
And there's a definition of a regionally significant project. I won't read the whole thing, but it's 23 CFR 450.104. It leaves some of that up into interpretation. At the end, it says, at a minimum, this includes all principal arterial highways and all fixed guideway transit facilities that offer an alternative to regional highway travel.
Well, so what I'm hearing though is that if a portion of a project that is deemed regionally significant by the state DOT is a part of an MPA, then the MPO still has full authority over that project. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. The MPO has all projects within the boundaries are the MPO's responsibility to program.
And that's not going to change I'm not going to argue, but that's not going to change our position.
Okay.
From the department.
Yeah.
And can I ask a question? So if there is a project that the MPO has programmed, does the state DOT have the authority to unilaterally make changes to the scope of projects that are on the TIP?
The TIP is the responsibility of the MPO. Any changes to the TIP and MTPs have to go through the MPO.
So I guess to put a finer point on it, for example, Emily, just to pick a recent one, AMATS approved project on Northern Lights that included a lane reallocation. Is that right, Aaron?
Correct.
An HSIP project, and DOT decided not to include the lane reallocation in the project. Is that right?
No, well, it's partially right. We're requiring it to go through an analysis because we don't design by anecdote.
But the result of that analysis could be that DOT would decide not to.
Could be.
Yeah. Does DOT have the authority to make that determination? Or does that need to be a decision of the policy committee?
I think it's kind of like what the scope of the project is within the MPO, as well as you're kind of adding on HSIP, which might, I don't know how it applies here. It might not. But if it's a design specific requirement, then there might not be, then maybe the project just doesn't move forward if DOT isn't going to design it the way that it's programmed. But essentially the scope of any project that comes out of that tip need ID has to be consistent with the scope that's in the tip. So if the tip says it's, I'm not sure what the design is here, but say you're going to construct a roundabout, and then the project that is ultimately recommended for design is not the same, then there needs to be a consensus between the MPO and the state DOT, because we wouldn't authorize a project that isn't consistent with the tip.
And then I guess the question would be, does DOT want to reimburse the municipality for a match on the project?
That's what it just happens. Well, I mean, I don't know.
I think the match question to me seems
It's fun.
a little undeveloped, the question of reimbursement. I think, Emily, just come back to you for a question in just a second, but I think it would potentially be helpful to have some understanding of DOT's intention there. Like, are you intending to ask the municipality for a reimbursement? And I wouldn't want us to answer like a purely hypothetical legal question.
Sure, yeah.
So I think it would be helpful to understand.
I just came up with that question today.
Yeah,
so-
okay. So I think that would just be, I think I might take that off of the list. And if you all want to send us a letter to specify like who's reimbursing you, like how does AMATS reimburse the state?
I'd leave it on the list, though. I mean, I think it's
Well, but I'd just like to get some more facts.
it's germane to the topic, right?
Well, but I think it'd be just helpful to get some facts to support a legal analysis of like what who is reimbursing who for what, because of why. I think like having some of those facts will be important for like framing a legal question. In the abstract, it might be hard to answer, but
Okay, so
I think I'm also curious to know if that has ever happened anywhere else in any other MPO.
thank you. That was maybe my question for Emily.
I have two questions, and sorry, I have to run because I have patience to see, but just while we still have Emily, so, okay, let's say we have a project programmed on our long-range transportation plan, our MTP, and then on our TIP. And a majority of the policy committee decides, you know what, conditions have changed. We've heard public comment that is no longer in favor of this project moving forward. Even if it's on the NHS, on the National Highway System, can a majority of the policy committee members cancel that project and remove it from the TIP and the MTP?
Yes, and we've seen that. O'Malley to Diamond was a project where there was not agreement with the overall scope of it. So in order to basically force these conversations to happen, it was pulled from the TIP, and that was by the MPO. You know, DOT can't pull projects from the TIP.
And then my second question is, we heard a briefing from DOT at our recent transportation committee meeting, which is the assembly. We have our own transportation committee. And they had discussed that they were coming up with new internal policies and procedures regarding road diets or lane drops. And I think as part of the timing that they want to take to put out an RFP for folks to respond to, and then be the consultant to help them come up with this new internal policy, that there are projects that have already been programmed in our transportation plans, and they are unilaterally, DOT is saying, we're going to delay these projects, and we can do that because they're on the National Highway System. Are they able to do, is DOT able, let me just ask my question, Sean, is DOT able to unilaterally push back projects in time that are already programmed by the policy committee?
Yeah, so on the NHS, essentially that's DOT's role, is to select projects from your approved TIP for implementation. So, you know, I would defer to DOT's process on delay, but like no planning, you know, we couldn't force, if I was an MPO or even if I was state DOT planners, and in control of the STIP, you can't force the design or anything to happen as fast as, you know, you'd want to. So I think that's more of we wouldn't be involved in that, but all I can say is that DOT gets to select the projects from the TIP for implementation that are on the NHS.
As scoped by the policy committee?
Yeah, they would have to be in alignment with the scope that's in the TIP.
Okay, thanks.
So they
Oh, yes,
please.
a bit of a misunderstanding there. I forwarded that RFP to show that language that is now in our chief engineer's directive. Certainly DOT has the ability to do that work in-house. It's a relatively small exercise. It doesn't include everything that I would have included with it. I would have included a more global analysis. It's specific to the road and doesn't include if we drop lanes on every road in the city. But yeah, so that those two are related, and that's part of that that agreement that we'll have in the future. But DOT certainly has the ability in house.
I don't think that was the question. Emily, can I ask you that same question another way? Or just verify what I think I just heard. So I think I heard you say that DOT can select projects from the TIP for implementation, but they cannot redline particular parts of a project that is already in the TIP. Is that correct? So
That's
they can
correct,
select
yes.
a whole project in or out, but they cannot piecemeal a project.
Right.
Okay.
But that's part of the design process. It's that analysis. It's part of the design process. And again, we're not going to design by anecdote. We're going to do an analysis to make sure that the drop in the lane is the correct decision. And we've said we're only going to do it on state-owned facilities. I think I would, if we talk about any project in the city as the policy committee body, then I'm going to vote that we should have that analysis in there. But
I think there's a marked difference between having a conversation among the policy committee about that being an additional step and DOT making that decision outside of the scope of the MPO. I think those are two very, very different approaches.
right. Well, I don't think they are, because I think it's part of the design process. We're not going to.
Yeah, that's interesting. That does feel like a little bit of a fundamental difference is do the designers get to decide? Do the engineers and do the DOT designers get to decide what the shape of the road is, or do the people of Anchorage? Feels like a sort of, I don't know, I think a lot of what we're talking about here is pretty fundamental to the purpose of an MPO, which is to give voice to the people of Anchorage and what the roads in our community look like, because they have such a huge effect on our housing, on our safety, on our quality of life. And so I think this idea that DOT can come and just say, no, you people of Anchorage want safer roads, or you want quieter roads, or you want roads that support our housing goals, know that our abstract engineering analysis says that that would increase traffic volumes by 1 second per day, and therefore you cannot do it, which I think is my reading of the DOT standards. I think that's pretty hard pill to swallow.
Agreed.
So anyway, I think we don't necessarily have to resolve all those agreements or even have all those disagreements here.
You get different phone calls.
Emily, could I ask one more question? Are you still there?
I am.
Okay, thank you. One more question. I want to be sure I've heard you really clearly. So the removal of a project from the TIP by an MPO, even if that project is nominally deemed regionally significant by the state DOT, does not constitute a significant expansion of the MPO's authority. That is a reasonable and traditional usage of MPO authority. Did I hear you correctly on that?
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you.
And again, our legal opinion disagrees. So.
Yes.
Okay.
I guess that would maybe be a follow-up question, which is to the degree, some of this is disagreement potentially between the AMATS Policy Committee and DOT. But it also seems like there's considerable disagreement between DOT and the federal government here. So I guess I'd be curious to understand what your timeline is or process is for resolving those points of disagreement with the federal government.
I don't know. I don't think we've even pursued that. So
Yeah.
I mean, we don't have anything in writing we have one thing in writing that's from the commissioner in February. I think that'd be my goal. Like I said from today,
Yeah.
is that we need to have a timeline to have something on the record so that we can have a discussion.
Emily, what would be the best way to have something on the record from FHWA with respect to some of these questions?
I guess just maybe an outline of questions sent to us for, I mean, yeah, if you want us to, we can have that. Federal Highways and FTA could certainly respond even via email, and whatever works best for you guys. It can come from DOT or from AMATS or from jointly.
Yeah, I think it feels like there's a disagreement really between FHWA and the Alaska DOT. And so it seems that some clarification there might be helpful. Would
Okay.
we address those concerns or that outline to you, or is there another person that would be best to address those questions to?
You can send them to me. We'll make sure that, we'll have to vet, obviously, the formal answer through a bunch of different groups here. So, and we'll be able to include FTA as well.
Great.
I guess I would say as a procedural next step, then potentially this hypothetical letter that the AMATS Policy Committee might include could include the municipality and the municipal attorney's preliminary answers to the legal questions, as well as further follow-up questions for Federal Highway Administration. Does that seem right?
That seems good to me.
And we can share this. I just looked in UARC on the FHW is not on the copy list for this letter. I don't know if you've seen it, Emily, but I can certainly share. And the commissioners start worried about it.
We have Lauren Little from DOT would like to comment. Lauren, would you like to comment?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to provide a little clarity here. The department does not have a disagreement with Federal Highways. Ultimately, the relationship there is Federal Highways will approve or not approve the projects. If they're in the MPA, they have to be in the TIP. There's no dispute there. So I'm not sure where the interpretation that DOT and Federal Highways disagree on anything is coming from. Fundamentally, the boundary expansion, the points from the letter that you guys received and FAST received are from our legal counsel, raising concerns over both some of the technical details of the boundary expansion, as well as some of the decision-making authorities that have been exercised. And as such, those two things are not advancing, because ultimately the operating agreement and the boundary expansion are between the MPO and the DOT up until December 31st, 2026 for the boundary expansion, at which point we're all still not entirely sure what happens. We're hopeful we're not going to get there, but I just want to clear that up. This is very much between the MPO and the department and the state. I don't see any disagreement with Federal Highways in any of this.
Well, that's hard to hear because I've heard Sean say I disagree a couple times to Emily. So
and I also think that the agreements are not between the MPO and DOT. The agreements are between the mayor and the governor. Those are the signatories on the agreement.
Whoever is authorized by the MPO to sign the agreement. For the AMATS agreement, you guys are entirely municipal in DOT. FAST and MVP have a different makeup. So I'm not entirely sure who signs those, but that is ultimately the agreement between the department and the MPO on how we will operate. Federal Highways does not have any role in those operating agreements.
Emily, do you agree that the Federal Highway Administration has no role in the operating agreement?
Yeah, we don't, I mean, we can review it, but we're not a signatory, like Lauren said.
Do you agree with Lauren that there are no disagreements between Federal Highways and DOT?
I have no, I mean, we're happy to work through that. I mean, I clearly understand that I'm being asked questions because there's conflicting information being presented. And so maybe that it's disagreements, I'm not entirely sure. Just here to provide our interpretation of federal requirements.
Yeah, maybe if I could try to put a finer lawyerly point on it. It seems like there are disagreements between DOT and potentially the municipality, potentially AMATS Policy Committee on interpretation of federal regulations. And the Federal Highway Administration's interpretation of those regulations is a relevant legal factor. Great.
So yeah, I think we've heard multiple points of disagreement thus far between the DOT's interpretation of federal regulations and the federal government's interpretation of its own regulations. So I'm struggling with the assertion that there's no disagreement. I mean, I think we've spent the last 15, 20 minutes working through points of disagreement between what the state has offered and what FHWA understands to be the federal regulations. So yeah, I'm having a hard time with that suggestion.
Yeah.
And I think I'm actually curious how the DOT intends to rectify or address some of these legal questions with FHWA, not with the MPO.
We have our legal opinion.
But the legal opinion itself is not the question. The question is that the incongruence between the legal opinion that's here and the opinion that was just articulated by FHWA. How does DOT intend to reconcile those two things, because they are not the same?
Lauren, would you like to chime in there?
Yeah, just at a very high level, when I say DOT and FHWA don't have disagreement, we understand FHW's position and we are complying with that in terms of our project development authorizations. We do have questions out there. There was an in-person meeting in DC. It feels like a lifetime ago, but I think it was back in February to get some clarity. That meeting resolved some clarity around the boundary expansion approval authorities. But it certainly leaves other points. But fundamentally, when we are talking about the operating agreement and boundary expansion conversation, that is not a conversation with federal highways. That is a conversation between the MPO and the DOT at this time. That is where the attempt to resolve these misunderstandings out, not specific to CFR, right? So there's CFR, but obviously CFRs are open to interpretation. There's the legal side of it. But at the end of the day, what we at DOT want to work through with AMATS and FAST and MVP is building in the clarity around these decision-making authorities so that we are not in these conflicts time after time, ultimately not serving the public and getting program on the street for them.
Lauren,
it's not just a legal argument, right? It's a how are we going to work together so that we're not in this position ever again.
Yeah, I think, Lauren, my understanding from the February 25th letter is that DOT is making a connection between the operating agreement and the boundary expansion. And that the Federal Highway Administration letter of July 14th says there is no connection between the operating agreement and the boundary question. I wonder, is that a legal question that we should investigate, or does DOT agree? Do you all agree that there is no connection between the boundary and the operating agreement?
I don't want to speak for the lawyer on that one, but fundamentally, DOT has raised legal concerns with the boundary expansion as well as with the content of the operating agreement, and feel that both need additional conversation before we can advance the boundary.
Okay.
So as I understand it, though, it's really not up to DOT to advance that agreement to the governor. That agreement is sent from the MPO directly to the governor, and it was sent to DOT as a matter of courtesy. And I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on the DOT's role in that sequence of events.
DOT works for the governor. He's going to take DOT's counsel on anything sent to him when it pertains to transportation.
Well, I understand that, but if the MPO approved the boundary, the boundary update, which I'm under the impression that the MPO did that.
Correct.
Okay. Then as I understand the process, that agreement doesn't go to DOT for ratification. It goes to the governor for ratification. And we sent it to DOT to say, hey, this is what the MPO has approved. And now that boundary agreement is being detained because there's been a linkage made between the boundary agreement or the boundary update and the operating agreement. And so it's really difficult not to sort of interpret that as like a hostage situation. If the MPO has done this and could, in fact, send the operating agreement directly to the governor, or the boundary update, excuse me, directly to the governor, that DOT would sort of truncate that process when that's not actually part of like the regulatory flow, that it actually goes from the MPO to the governor.
Again, I'm not gonna change my answer, I guess. Is
Yeah.
that we, we provide the governor counsel on all items transportation related.
Has the governor seen the boundary update?
I'm not sure.
Well, okay, I think
One of our questions was to determine if that boundary was properly expanded too, right?
yeah. I think we should probably move, I think what we've decided is this is a legal question where there is potential disagreement between at least AMATS or the municipality and DOT. So it seems like it should go on the list of questions that we should get a preliminary legal answer to. And again, I think to revisit, there's sort of the three related questions. Are the boundary and operating agreement legally related? Was the boundary properly expanded? Did it follow the federal regulations? Those are the two.
You want to go through all of them you've asked so far?
Sure.
Okay, first, is the assertion correct? Can the governor not approve the boundary without an operating agreement update?
I would say that slightly differently.
That's what you guys said, so.
I would say it just to be a lawyer about it. I would say, is the governor required to not approve the boundary until the operating agreement is changed? I wouldn't presume to say the governor must do anything.
Okay.
But I would ask, I think there's an assertion in the letter that the governor cannot approve the boundary until the operating agreement questions are resolved.
Okay, so is the governor required to not approve? All right, approve the boundary until the operating agreement is changed. Next, are the assertions about the regulatory implications for the boundary correct from the letter?
Meaning that those regulatory requirements point toward an update to the operating agreement?
No, whether or not we follow the regulatory
Okay,
assertions in there to update the boundary or not,
gotcha.
or if we missed something.
Okay. I think I also heard that DOT believes that the expansion of the expansion in the boundary update constitutes a rationale for an operating agreement update. Was that correct? Did I hear that right?
I think that's sort of the first question.
Okay.
The next one is the Safe for Seward Highway removal from the and tip and change to the authority of AMATS? And then
That would require an operating agreement
Mm-hmm.
update.
next, on regionally significant roads or NHS NHS roads, does DOT have the authority to make changes without the PC approval?
Yes.
Okay. Next, for projects on the NHS and regionally significant projects, is the PC required to include them, or can the PC change or reject them?
I would just clarify that pronoun.
Yep.
To say something maybe more along the lines of, is the policy committee obliged to include state submitted projects in the tip?
Is the policy
Is that-
committee
Is that correct?
to include state submitted projects
Yes,
in the tip and MTP?
yes.
Okay.
Or can and does the policy committee have the authority to reject or change or amend those projects before approving them?
Sorry, what? Is it state submitted projects that are NHS and regionally significant? Okay.
Mhm.
Sorry. Tip or can the. Let me just read it back a second, hold on. Is the PC obliged to include state submitted projects on the NHS and regionally significant projects in the tip and MTP? Or can the PC change or reject them? I might have missed that last little bit, so clarify if that's correct.
And Sean, chime in if you think these are not things we disagree about.
I think that the last two questions are pretty close, but that's okay.
Well, I think there's just sort of the order of operations. Like, I think there's sort of two pieces going on here. One is, does AMATS need to take every state says this is a regionally significant project? Does AMATS have to say, yes, it is, and put it in the tip? Or do we have the ability to say, yes, it's regionally significant, but we don't think that you should spend this much money on it, or we think you should do it later, or we think you should consider these designs, some of those things. And then the other question is, AMATS has approved a project, it's in the tip, it's in the MTP, it's in the STIP, maybe it's even gotten some funding, and DOT says, we're gonna change the scope of this. You said we were doing pavement preservation, but actually we want to convert it all to a bike lane.
If you want me to add that as a question.
Those are just the two questions.
Yeah, I think he just restated the last two questions.
Okay.
I think I would take the reimbursement question off of the list.
Yep.
And I think if it is DOT's intention to seek reimbursement from AMATS for a project that is canceled by DOT, then I think I think that would be silly, and I hope you wouldn't, because I think that's part of the MPO process. But if that is DOT's or the state's intention, then it would be good to have something in writing about which projects and why and how much money, so that we could have a better legal analysis of that. Great.
And I think it's hypothetical at this point.
Yeah,
But
yeah, and I hope that it remains hypothetical, because it seems like a whole can of worms. But I think it'd also be interesting when we get there to have some historical and comparative analysis, like how does it work in other states? How has it worked in the past?
just I think out loud, not a question that we should answer, but I wonder how many states, how many MPOs have jurisdiction control over the interstate system and other states. I don't know if that's common or not. You know?
I think it would be a relevant part of the analysis.
So I have that the St. Cloud, Minnesota MPO that was at our peer exchange does have authority over all roads within their MPO boundary. In fact, my understanding is they select all of the projects, whereas we get a list from DOT of the projects to include. So there's a little bit of difference there. I don't have a list of all MPOs in the nation to ask them, but we can start asking around. Maybe I can reach out to AMPO with these questions as well and see if we can get responses back from other MPOs throughout the country during this process, if you're interested.
Yes, please. I think that would be relevant to the legal analysis.
Okay.
Okay, I think those are the questions to answer, right?
Can you give me a second to scroll?
I think the other thing I might say as potentially is closing, and hope maybe a big aspirational, but when we're closing, I think there's some statements from DOT that the cause for the delay is AMATS. And I think from my point of view, all of this conversation is unnecessary if we just have better collaboration earlier, which I think is a shared goal. And so I think ideally we can get on the same page, but I think regardless, actually, even of the legal answers, I think the best practice moving forward is just to have earlier and closer collaboration as we move through the STIP and the TIP project, so that we don't get to the point where there's a project coming before the policy committee that is just completely out of whack with community expectations, with funding availability, so that we don't get in the position where the policy committee is vetoing projects or having to ask questions. And I think
Changing scopes. Yeah. I don't know how you insulate it. I mean, I appreciate it. I think Aaron has maybe talked about different ways to have a more, better defined scope up front. That's a real good idea.
Yeah.
I don't know how you insulate it from the changing policy makers, I guess.
Well, I think
our projects go for so long, 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. But I think if you take the Safer Sewer project, I mean, there was questions, we raised questions in advance. The TAC asked a lot of questions. We asked a lot of questions on the policy committee. Months later, we didn't have answers to the questions. And it makes it very hard for me as a policy committee member to vote yes on a multi-billion-dollar project when we don't have I would call pretty fundamental information about cost and scope and rationale for why it's improving safety. I think that's where we just need more information earlier to be able to avoid situations like what we ended up with in the Safer Sewer project.
Okay, before we go, I just want to make sure I understand. So we have these questions. What would you like me to do next? I heard outline questions to send over to FHWA and FTA for response. Are these the questions you want sent over, or is that something else?
No, I think what I wowould like to happen next, if it's amenable, I know we're not taking action as a policy committee, so.
Yep.
But I think, Aaron, if you want to work with Joe in the municipal attorney's office to get some preliminary legal answers to those questions,
Okay,
and then bring a potential memo to the policy committee, ideally at the October meeting, for us to read, review, and potentially approve. And again, ideally October, let us know if that timeline isn't going to work out for whatever reason. And that memo would include potentially questions for FHWA.
Okay.
Although I'd be open to collaboration in, if that's, okay, so I think actually I would encourage you to work with municipal attorney's office and the, if Emily is amenable or others, with the Federal Highway Administration Office also in drafting that letter.
okay, sounds good. Let's do that.
Any objections from committee members on that? We're not voting on it, but.
No, I think that's where I started. That's what I.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Formal correspondence.
just to make sure I have my directions clear, even though you're not voting on it, that's what we'll do. Work with Muni Legal and work with FHWA to get preliminary answers to these legal questions that we have here and bring that to October for you guys to review the letter and then decide what you want to do. Okay,
So,
sounds good. We'll go ahead and get working on that.
Great.
thank you.
I think the other two questions we don't need to answer today.
Well-
Should AMAT speak outside legal counsel? I think we can see
Yeah,
how
there's no,
this goes, yeah.
No.
And then what's gonna happen with the legal results and how we'll have the findings.
yeah,
I don't think we could.
Yeah,
Yeah.
mood us at the point. Yeah, okay,
great.
Okay, thank you all very much.
thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Sean.
Thanks, Sean.